Have you ever been around an elderly person and felt strangely uncomfortable, but could not figure out why? What if I told you there are 12 habits in old age that almost everyone notices, but nobody dares to mention? Could you handle seeing them all? Some are harmless, but others will shock you in ways you never imagined. Stay with me, because by the end, you will never look at aging the same way again. The room smelled faintly of old perfume and dust. Sunlight filtered through yellowed curtains, casting strange shadows on the walls. I sat across from my grandfather, noticing for the first time how he tapped his fork against the plate, over and over. Each tap echoed in the quiet kitchen, a rhythm that made my skin crawl. He chewed loudly, not bothering to close his mouth, and I shifted in my chair. I had never seen him like this, so careless, so loud. When he spoke, he sniffed constantly between words, a habit I had ignored for years. But today, every sniff sounded magnified, invasive, impossible to ignore. He reached for the salt, spilling some onto the table. Instead of cleaning it, he brushed it toward himself with a shaky hand, smearing grains across the tablecloth. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Then he began to whistle through his teeth, a strange, sharp tune that grated against my nerves. It was not a happy whistle, but a shrill, unsteady noise that filled the room with tension. I noticed his fingernails, long and unkempt, streaked with dirt for moments before I had not paid attention to. Every movement he made seemed exaggerated in a way that demanded attention, made the room shrink around him. He muttered under his breath, words I could not catch, but the tone carried a bitter edge. Even the way he scratched his arm sent shivers down my spine, the nails scraping the skin loud in the silence. I tried to focus on the sunlight outside, on the trees swaying gently in the wind, but the sound of his chair scraping the floor with every shift reminded me of each tiny discomfort, each ugly habit that made me uneasy. I realized there were more, so many small things, invisible to others, that added up into a storm of discomfort. And then he sneezed, violently, without a tissue, the sound raw and uncontrolled. The room seemed to shrink further, the air thick with the sharp, unpleasant scent. I felt my stomach twist, a mixture of fear and unease I could not shake. I wanted to escape, to leave the room and never return. But my grandfather looked up, eyes sharp and searching, and I froze. It was then I realized the full weight of it. The habits we ignore, the truths we never speak, and the discomfort that builds quietly over time. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to calm the unease curling in my stomach. But the moment my eyes drifted, I saw it again, his fingers tapping incessantly on the armrest. Not a gentle tap, but sharp, impatient, almost aggressive, as though each tap demanded the room's attention. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, small but insistent, like an alarm I could not silence. He leaned forward suddenly, sniffing the air once, twice, sharply, as if he were searching for something invisible. I realized he did not notice, or perhaps did not care, that his loud inhalations made my head pound. I glanced at the chair opposite mine. The cushion was worn, torn at the edge, with stuffing peeking through. He did not care about this either. Nothing seemed to matter except the habits he followed relentlessly, unconsciously, with no thought for anyone else. The next thing hit me like a wave. He began to clear his throat repeatedly, dragging out the sound so it rattled my eardrums. Every cough and gurgle echoed against the walls, each one more insistent than the last. I flinched as he bent to scratch the side of his neck, and the fingernails, long and uneven, made a scraping noise that cut through the quiet. The room felt smaller, heavier, each sound magnified until it pressed down on me like weight I could not escape. I tried to look away, focusing on a crack in the wall, but his eyes caught mine, sharp and demanding, and I realized he had noticed my discomfort. A sudden shame flooded me. Why was I uneasy? He had always been harmless, kind even, yet the habits I had ignored for years now assaulted me all at once. Then came the smell, sour, faint but unmistakable. I traced it to him, to the thin, worn sweater he wore, stained in ways I had never noticed before. I hesitated, wanting to look away, yet unable to escape the sensory assault. Every wrinkle, every careless movement, every unwashed scent seemed magnified today, as if the room itself conspired to make me feel trapped. He reached for his cup of tea, his hands trembling. Some tea spilled over the edge, leaving a dark, wet ring on the table. Instead of grabbing a napkin, he wiped it with the edge of his sleeve, leaving a stain and a faint smear of crumbs. My throat tightened. How had I not seen these things before? Or had I chosen not to? He hummed, low and monotonous, almost a chant, as he shifted in his chair. It was neither pleasant nor melodic. It was intrusive, persistent, a sound that seemed to echo inside my skull. My heartbeat quickened. Each small action, harmless on its own, piled upon the others until I felt suffocated. I glanced at the clock. Minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. I noticed his shoes, scuffed and worn, the soles peeling slightly. He shuffled as he moved, dragging his feet, the sound of rubber against floorboards grating, uneven, irregular. Even the faint clicking of the floor echoed in the air, another irritation layering on top of the rest. Suddenly, he leaned back and let out a long sigh, loud and exaggerated. It carried frustration, perhaps even impatience, as though the entire world had failed him. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The sigh sounded like a warning, a signal that nothing would stop him. Not now, not ever. And then he coughed again. This time, he coughed into his hand, wiping his mouth afterwards with the back of his sleeve. I wanted to tell him, scream at him even, to stop, to notice the discomfort he caused. But the words lodged in my throat. There was a strange power in his habits, a silent insistence that I could not break, that demanded tolerance even as it provoked disgust. I watched as he picked at his nails, small bits of skin and dirt under the edges, flicked onto the floor without a thought. He sniffed again, sharp and loud, leaning back into the chair with a creak that seemed to echo like a drum. Every small gesture, every subtle noise, built a rhythm of discomfort I could not ignore. The sunlight faded slightly, shadows lengthening. I realized I had been holding my breath, tense, my body rigid with unease. He reached for a biscuit, fingers greasy from earlier meals, and bit into it with a loud crunch. The sound seemed impossibly loud now, magnified by the quiet room, and I flinched. He leaned forward, speaking softly, but the words were punctuated with sniffing, throat clearing, and subtle scrapes of his nails against the table. I realized then that these were just the first few of the habits, the ones most visible. There were more, 12 in total, each subtle, each irritating, each building a tension that hovered like a cloud over every moment spent near him. And as the realization sank in, I understood something chilling. These habits, unnoticed or tolerated by others, had accumulated over decades, like a hidden storm. And now, in this quiet kitchen, I was trapped in the eye of it, feeling the full weight of discomfort, shock, and unavoidable awareness. I wanted to look away, to escape the room, but a strange sense of duty held me in place. I had to witness it, had to understand, had to face the truth about old age, habits, and the quiet power they carried over those who noticed them too late. I realized the first habit was the tapping, constant, impatient, like a metronome of irritation. The second, the sniffing, loud, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. Third, the chewing with an open mouth, each bite amplified in the quiet room. Fourth, the spilling of food or drink and careless wiping with sleeves or hands, leaving smears and crumbs everywhere. Fifth, the throat clearing, dragging each sound across the air until it scraped at my nerves. Sixth, the humming, low and persistent, like a shadow of sound I could not escape. Seventh, the fingernail picking and scratching, creating a sharp, invasive rhythm that pressed into my skin. Eighth, the dragging of feet or shuffling, each step punctuating the silence with an uneven beat. Ninth, the exaggerated sighs, carrying an invisible weight that seemed to settle in the room like smoke. 10th, the careless sneezing, uncaring where the germs flew, the sound raw and uncontrollable. 11th, the repeated muttering under the breath, words I could not catch but that carried impatience, irritation, and sometimes anger. 12th, the sense, body, clothing, food, mingling into a faint but unshakable presence that made the air heavy and thick. I felt my stomach twist as I counted them silently, one by one. Each habit alone might have been tolerable, a minor inconvenience. But together, they formed a storm that wrapped around me, suffocating, inescapable. I noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his cup again. The flick of crumbs, the scrape of fingernails, the faint smell of something sour, all heightened now. The shadows in the corner seemed darker, the sunlight weaker, as if the room itself recoiled from the tension. He leaned back, eyes half closed, lost in his own world. I wanted to speak, to warn him, to explain how unbearable it was, but my voice felt small, useless. He had lived decades like this, habits ingrained deep in muscle memory and mind, each one a small assertion of his presence. The ticking of the clock on the wall became deafening, each second marking another moment trapped in the web of discomfort. I felt sweat prickling at my temples, a low hum of anxiety that matched the rhythm of his tapping fingers. Even the faint breeze from the open window could not dilute the intensity of the room, the compounded habits pressing in from every direction. Then, without warning, he coughed again, louder this time, sharp and urgent. I flinched instinctively, heart hammering, as the smell of the air shifted. Stale tea, old perfume, and a tang I could not name. Every sound, every motion, every scent collided into a perfect storm of sensory shock. I understood then the cruel irony of old age. The people we love, the faces we remember, carry habits we cannot unsee, habits that unsettle those around them in ways nobody dares to admit. And in that quiet kitchen, with shadows stretching long and sunlight fading, I was forced to witness it all. I realized some truths were inevitable. Time changes people, habits solidify, and discomfort grows quietly, invisible until it strikes all at once. I sat frozen, heart racing, caught between love and revulsion, realizing that the old man I adored carried a dozen small storms inside him, and I could not escape them. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to sit still as he continued, oblivious, each habit playing its quiet symphony. And yet, as I watched, something shifted inside me. The irritation, the discomfort, the tension, it began to soften. I saw the years etched into his face, the trembling of his hands, the careful way he navigated the chair. Each habit, each noise, each smell, became less a nuisance and more a reminder of the life he had lived. The tapping, the sniffing, the chewing, they were marks of decades spent surviving, loving, and enduring. I realized then that these small, ugly habits were not cruelty or carelessness. They were proof of existence, of a body aging, of a mind still present, of routines that had comforted him in ways I could not understand. The air no longer felt suffocating, the sounds no longer grating. Instead, they filled the room with a strange intimacy, raw and unfiltered. I reached forward, placing my hand over his. The tremor beneath my palm made me smile softly. He looked up, eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw recognition, a shared understanding that needed no words. We sat together in silence, letting the habits, the noises, the imperfections be. The sunlight faded slowly, painting the room in warm gold, softening every edge, every shadow. I realized then that love does not wait for perfection. It accepts the awkward, the uncomfortable, the inconvenient, and still finds connection. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the sounds and smells of age and life, I learned a final truth. The discomfort fades when compassion steps in. The habits that once shocked me now felt like echoes of a life fully lived. I rose to leave, feeling lighter, and he smiled, the faintest curve of his lips. I understood, in that moment, that the small storms of old age were not something to escape. They were something to witness, to honor, and ultimately, to accept. As I stepped out into the fading sunlight, I carried with me a newfound patience, a quiet awe, and a gentle gratitude. For the ugly habits, the small annoyances, the shocks, they were all part of the story. A story of time, of life, and of the enduring bond between generations, imperfect and beautiful. And I knew, finally, that love and understanding requires nothing more than presence.